Hello, and welcome to the Unnamed Reverse Engineering Podcast. I'm Jen Castillo, and with me is Alvaro Prieto. Great, you pushed the... Hey, how's it going? And today we have two guests, Josh and Noah. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
Yeah, so I guess I can go first. I'm Noah Holland. I'm the president of the Michigan Tech Red Team. And so we also run the Access Control Village at CypherCon and SecretCon. So where we cover all things access control, digital locks, physical locks, all that kind of cool stuff.
I'm Josh. I just graduated from Michigan Tech with a CS degree. I also help run the Access Control Village, and we also run the physical. We help with the physical security village at DEF CON as well.
How long have y'all been doing the villages?
We've been doing it for, I guess, a little over 1 year now, I guess, like 1.5 years. It actually got started, funnily enough, last SecretCon. So this was SecretCon back when it was in November. There was supposed to be an access control village, and we thought they were a no-show. So we were at the time big hobbyists of access control. So we put all of our stuff on the table, and we kind of called ourselves the impromptu access control village. And people treated us like a real village. They were going around and interacting with our kind of impromptu displays. And eventually Michael, the event organizer, came around and he thought it was really cool. So he invited us to come back formally to CypherCon.
So we should, for those of you who don't know what CypherCon is or SecretCon, since I'm relatively new to the area and to both of those conferences, one of which I have not even gone, CypherCon is the Wisconsin-based security research technical conference, which overlaps in a bunch of different ways. It is purported to be the largest technical conference in all of Wisconsin and possibly the Midwest. I'm not really sure. And it's taken care of by Michael, aka Monster. I don't remember his last name off the top of my head. And then he also runs SecretCon, which is in Minnesota in November. Is that about right? I think that was more crypto.
Yeah, although he recently changed SecretCon to be right after CypherCon, so it's actually coming up in like a month.
Oh. He's just really trying to open up his year, it sounds like, by just pushing everything out. Yeah. So you're going to be there, though?
Yeah, yes? That's the plan.
Okay. So it started with you, basically a pop-up village, and over the last year, so you came back for CypherCon. So why don't you tell people a little bit about what you were showing that first time?
So the first time we didn't have too much kind of prepared, so we just brought a whole bunch of kind of fun stuff like elevator keys, key cutting equipment, and we had a couple keys people could cut, but there was no real defined task or anything. And so we just set it all on the table, and we're kind of telling people like, this is like stuff that you can do. These are tools that exist. And people were asking us a lot of questions. We were kind of answering them. The first SecretCon, especially the very first, even like recently, it's much smaller than CypherCon. It's only been around, for 2 years at this point. So there's a lot less attendees. It was more manageable. It was just like a group of some of us there. At the time we were there because our red team had paid for us just to attend the conference. And so
nice.
That's why we thought it would be kind of cool to just have our own little mini table. But now, of course, this is more of like an official gig we have going. And so in the past couple of years, we've been actually preparing in advance. So we like bring challenges. So it's not just like these tools exist. It's like, here's how to actually use them. Here's like what they can do. Here's the security implications. So I think we've kind of been able to pivot it pretty well.
Okay. Well, I guess obviously, you just showing up and saying, "Hey, here's the stuff," and eventually coming up with challenges, seems pretty far down the rabbit hole. So why don't we go all the way back to the beginning? How exactly did you guys get involved in reverse engineering, particularly in this area?
So I think Josh he should probably go first on this one. He was the first one of us to attend at Tech, and I think that's where we
Mhm.
both kind of got our start.
Sure. So the Red Team Club that Noah is now the president of hosted a CTF my freshman year, and I competed in that, and it was the first time I used Geejar, any reverse engineering tool. I ended up getting first in the CTF, and that really got me started. I started doing the NCL. We do the National Cyber League competition, and then reversing E&E was they call it exploitation and something else. I don't know what the other E stands for, but I got into it through basically CTFs through my school. I did a internship where I did some hardware reversing kind of stuff. And then also we like to mess with our like RFID cards at our school, and learning how those work kind of got us more into the access control space.
Okay, so
So
breaking into other labs and throwing parties.
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
Yeah, and as Josh said, that was a similar case for me. Although I actually got my start with him, so he got his start from a CTF that the Michigan Tech Red Team hosted, and then eventually later on, I just joined them as a participant in another CTF with Josh, and so then that's where I did that. Enumeration and exploitation is that category name for NCL. I did some of that. That's kind of example challenges. Like here's kind of a beginning to standard reverse engineering, more like software based. But for access control stuff, yeah, we first met at the Linux club at our school actually, and realized that we're both trying to kind of poke at how the RFID tech works. We're both pretty interested, but we didn't know anything at the time. And so through kind of trial and tribulation, we figured out how all that stuff works, kind of reversed it, figured it out. We're able to get some kind of cool stuff working, like able to write a clone of like just your own ID, that kind of stuff. And so after we figured that out, we're like, oh, wait, it's kind of the same format, Weigand that we use is in use basically everywhere. That's just the industry standard. And so we started looking into just more general products and that are in use in other institutions and other places. And we realized that it's pretty much like standard. And then in a sense that it's not very secure anywhere. So it's something we've been interested in kind of talking about, educating people about,
Uh-huh.
and doing stuff from there.
You mean commercialized stuff is
Yes,
put out
very
there
much.
for on a cost basis, not a security or what makes
Yeah.
sense for that particular client? Go figure.
hmm
So I think one thing I feel like we glossed over this because this question immediately popped up and you answered it, but you guys met at, do I have this right, at a Linux meetup, right? Like a
Yes.
Linux users group? Okay, that's that's a pretty far distance from like, "Hey, yo, like, what's your favorite shell?" to, "Hey, let's go clone cards at
hmm
this hotel." Not saying that's what happened, but you get what I'm saying.
hmm
Like, explain to me without being super memey, what was the meet cute around that?
Um, yeah. So,
Was it
I
just
mean,
2 people at the meeting and it was just you and him and that's what happened? Or was it
yeah,
goofier?
that's
well,
kind of
we
what
were
happened. But so in general, like we were kind of meeting up, doing stuff, and I mean, at the Linux users group meetings in general, like they get pretty technical. They talk about kind of random stuff, like, oh, I was helping telecom with their network, so it gets like pretty kind of niche technical stuff. And at some point, I think we had mentioned something about like our IDs, or somebody must have like spurred it on. Maybe like using our own IDs to unlock our computer or something. That's something you can do in Linux. And so you can use like an NFC application for that. So that might have been like where it started. But in general, there's always been a lot of that kind of engineer's curiosity, kind of hacker culture overlap with the Linux club on campus. That's why the Red Team was supposedly, this was before my time, but apparently the Red Team was spun off of the Linux users group back in the past. And so I think there's always been a little bit of that kind of inherent curiosity and like how the technology works, that kind of stuff. So I don't think it's fully surprising that of anywhere the Linux users group is the place where kind of we spun off from there.
Yeah. Alvaro, would you agree with that assessment? Like, I don't know if you ever showed up to any of the Silicon Valley users group stuff, but I
No, I
vaguely remember.
haven't.
Oh, okay.
Just the reverse engineering meetup, the Mountain View reverse engineering meetup.
There was, is it Giovanni's Pizza? I think that's where usually the other one
Oh,
is,
but
but
that might be a different one. Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
No, I mostly hang out with the more hardware folk.
Yes.
Mhm.
They're very, they have better social skills. I'm I'm theorizing. That's what it feels like. Okay. So, thank you for all that background. So, okay, so you got into control access. What exactly happened next? Because the story that you told me we haven't quite touched on yet that spawned what I saw at CypherCon.
Mhm. Yeah, so are you just asking about our demonstration
Yeah.
specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess a little bit of it starts with last DEF CON.
Yes. So we have been running this stuff in general at CypherCon, at DEF CON, and while we're teaching people, at the same time, we ourselves are learning more about these formats and these technologies. So that's why we really enjoy doing it. It's kind of learning by doing. And so after we learned a decent amount about some of these technologies, I'm not going to claim to be an expert, but we know kind of the fundamentals of how the technology works and then also how it's common for what are called like online pack systems. Well, eventually, when I go to a new apartment, I noticed that they're using this system called SafeLock. And so that got us, because we're naturally pretty curious, we at first figured out how our student IDs worked, and then now this kind of branched off into, oh, well, how do these fobs work at this apartment? And so this was shortly after the UnsafeLock talk at last DEF CON, and they actually had released some information about it the March prior to that DEF CON. So this was like a known vulnerable system. They just didn't release any information about it. I remember at the time we had actually talked about it in red team meetings. We were kind of theorizing like, oh, I wonder like how the system is vulnerable because all they said at the time is it's possible to get master keys from the guest key. And so once they released more information about this at DEF CON, we started kind of poking at the system ourselves. And that's when we figured out that it's the new apartment building that was built like within the last year. It was still being built when we were figuring all this stuff out. The locks they had installed were the vulnerable ones that supposedly Dormakaba was working on patching out. So we thought that was interesting. And so we were kind of figuring out more how that works. And so the demonstration that we brought to CypherCon was just a standard old system where it's called it's SafeLock is the name of the lock brand, and the exploit is named UnSafeLock. So they found an exploit. I guess it's not so safe anymore. And so we brought a little hotel demo door, and then I just took some old hotel key cards from old hotels I had. I reprogrammed them to work on the door, and then we built a tool for the Proxmark to help parse the key and then help re-encode a new key. And so that was kind of how we did it for the demonstration at CypherCon. And then, of course, the same stuff we did for CypherCon would have worked on the apartment because it's able to decode the key fobs and all that kind of stuff. So I thought that was really interesting because the apartment uses a different system where it uses Sapphire locks, which are for apartments. So they call them like multi-family housing, I believe is how Dormakaba refers to it. And then they actually use different software too, which is interesting. So the software we use to set up our demo for CypherCon was called System 6000. That was their old software for hotels. The new software is called Ambience, but apartment complexes use something called Dormakaba Community. So there's all these different software variants out there, but all of them follow the same format. So I don't know if that's like a backwards compatibility thing. I thought it was really interesting that they haven't really changed the format, even though they've basically charged business owners for these upgrades year after year. I thought that was
You mentioned Proxmark, so I'm familiar with that tool, but can you explain really quick what the Proxmark is?
yeah, so the Proxmark is a really good RFID, kind of Swiss Army knife of anything NFC RFID. It can do a lot of different technologies. So it does a lot of like low frequency stuff, high frequency, whereas with SafeLock, that's only high frequency. And what we were focusing on is MIFARE Classic in that high frequency range.
Okay. And so MIFARE Classic, is that something you could even do with Flipper Zero?
Yes, you could as well. And so they demoed that. At DEF CON. So they use like a little flipper applet where you read a fob and you just tap it on the door, and then you can get it to open it. But you could do that a lot more streamlined than what they had set up. And from our further testing, we figured out that eventually the programmer for the locks itself programs over NFC. So we're still poking at this, but we suspect it's possible to emulate the programmer from a flipper. And once you get that property ID, that's the only piece of information you need to emulate an
Oh.
emergency key. So you could have like an
Yeah.
all-in-one flipper applet that it's called interrogating the lock. You interrogate the lock and immediately get the property ID and then emulate an emergency key, and that would work to open the door. So it would be like an
Ooh.
all-in-one. And this is, if we figure this out, we'll demo it, but we would probably not release that. I think that's a little too
Yeah.
risky to just release. But as far as the technology goes, we do plan to potentially release the tool that we had at CypherCon for the Proxmark, where that's not like an all-in-one, like insert guest key. Okay, here's your master key. It's just, it lets you parse the fields and like flip bits yourself. So as far as that goes, like I think we're kind of teetering the line on making sure that everything we're doing is relatively like not too much like giving people illegitimate access or anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to make it too easy.
Yeah.
Well, okay, there's so many questions that have popped up. One, if, in theory, if what I remember seeing a flipper one time supposedly is that, you could copy multiple keys. So let's say you generated that key, that your app could probably hold and exchange countless property override keys,
Hmm.
is what I would expect. And then I guess if you made this, do you feel like you're going to do a disclosure with them? Because it seems like what they ultimately, at least what I understood from the DEF CON talk, was that they worked with the company and they've
Yes.
replaced those locks. But I'm wondering if it's really just a software, like a software side
But they have to
changes,
update the
not.
locks themselves, right?
That's what we were told.
Yes. So, as far as that goes, they worked with Dormicaba, and they said by DEF CON, I believe it was like 60 to 70% was the figure they were given by Dormicaba. So 60 to 70% of installs were patched. Now, the reason why I find that interesting is, again, going back to how my apartment was built in the last year and uses the vulnerable system, means that Dormicaba has to be aware that there's still installs out there using the vulnerable, not just MyFair Classic, but also the old encryption algorithm on the cards. Because in the software, it says if you're using MyFair Classic, it says like warning, like fobs can be cloned. And so a lot of business owners are going to see that and they're like, okay, well, I don't really care that much. But the problem isn't that they can be cloned. The problem is that you can modify your own card and get access elsewhere, right? So I think that's part of it. Is it's a little questionable that they say that they fixed 60%. I'm not sure if that was 60% of businesses that have reached out to them so far. But that's one aspect that we want to be a little careful about is it's not clear how many have actually been patched. Maybe it has been 60%, but I mean, the majority of hotels I've stayed at are still vulnerable. So I'm not too sure. And as far as the patching goes, you shouldn't need new hardware unless you have really old locks. You should be able to update them from an HH6. From what I can tell, the HH6, that's the handheld programmer for the system, when you reprogram it to the new update, as far as I'm aware, all it basically does for the older locks is just disable MyFair Classic support. So it's still the same encryption algorithm on the ultralight cards. It's just that you're not using MyFair Classic anymore. So that way, because ultralight isn't a broken standard, the ultralight version that they use, it's the triple S one. I think that's ultralight C. Um, that one isn't a broken algorithm. Attackers can't overwrite their own card. So in theory, if they had access to the card, the data on the card, they could do the same thing we've been doing, where you like flip the bits, you eventually get the emergency key in, and you can go around unlocking doors. It's kind of like a band-aid fix. Although people in the Proxmark Discord have mentioned how I think there's going to be another disclosure at this upcoming DEF CON where someone figured out the key diversification function for the ultralight keys as well. So it's kind of like a bit of a, yeah, like constant back and forth where like they'll do a little bit of a band-aid fix. It's not quite all the way, and then somebody else will uncover the vulnerabilities that are left behind because of that. So there's not really been a proper fix as of yet.
It's like they say, right? Why do things right when you can do them twice
Yeah, right.
or
Josh,
10
what are you
times?
gonna?
I don't know how many times they're going to have to patch it, but yeah.
Well,
I
Noah, is
thought
there
so.
not a proper fix in that they do have per site AES if you buy the Gen 2 encoders?
That is true. They do have per site AES keys for the data on the card. I don't know if those work with MyFair Classic. They seem to imply they do, but I don't know if that's actually true. Whereas I know that there can be ultralight with per site AES, so that is secure. But that requires the Gen 2 encoder and it requires relatively modern locks. I don't believe some of the older RFID locks, like the MT RFID, that are pretty common, those are like kind of the de facto hotel lock. Those I don't believe can support per site
Yeah,
AES.
so it wouldn't just be a firmware update. You'd have to physically replace the
Yes, in
lock.
that case you would, and
Mhm.
it's kind of funny. I found a post on Reddit in like r/maintenance or something, where a bunch of
Mm,
these maintenance guys were grumbling about how Dormakaba kind of just dropped this on them without much warning and without much
context.
information.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so they're just like, "Hey, you have to replace all your locks in your hotel now. Have fun."
Well, because if they knew the
So
truth, what
yeah.
would your next step be? I I guess the thing that struck me was that they basically had put the same technology, same flawed technology into a domicile, not a hotel room.
Hmm.
Hotel room, you have it for a limited amount of time, and it sucks if someone comes in and steals all your shit or snoops. But it's far worse if it's your regular residence.
I mean, they probably had a bunch of additional stock of
Well,
locks
they
to be
were marked
removed.
down. Well, and I think I don't remember, was it you, Josh, who was telling me that, like, "Oh, yeah, this was totally cheap to find because
Yeah, there
eBay."
should be a lot in the market because
Yeah.
they can't. You're not supposed to use them
Yeah.
anymore.
They mentioned that in the original SafeLock talk where they show the price before and after, where the Gen 1 encoders are super cheap now because you need the Gen 2 encoders for per site AES keys. Um, so
Yeah. No, it was I'm gonna ask something stupid. Did they did your leasing agent, like, even give you the opportunity to say, "Hey, can we just go to a physical lock? I'll use the
No.
rest of it for." Okay.
And interestingly enough, they actually don't have any physical locks in this new property. All of them are RFID. And they don't even have key overrides. That's like a SKU that you can buy where you can get the lock that has a keyed override. If I guess that like it's peace of mind, but they didn't even go with that. So it's
Right,
like
because they can
fully
do it
electric.
digitally. Why would they? Yeah, my last apartment, and we didn't have any keys. It was a keypad, but they could still add codes remotely. So if maintenance wanted to come into my apartment, they could just unlock the door remotely or set a new code and do that, and they love that.
I believe
Hmm.
they do. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I'm sorry. Apparently, I think in Hollywood movies at all points in time, and I'm just thinking about serial murder and, just, like, or somebody stealing, like, all the diamonds from this one
Well,
hotel.
but this safe lock ones, they're offline blocks, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the thing.
Yes.
Versus if you had like the ones in this place I was at, it was all internet connected. They would work offline with a code, but um, if
But
you're
why?
online, they could just override and do whatever they wanted and keep track of who's going in and out. And so it's a slightly different system.
Yeah.
Still terrible, but
Yes. It's all terrible.
yeah, the my current place, I do have a one that you have a key override, but I have a keypad, but it's the one that you only can program physically, and it will lock out after I don't know 5 missed entries or something like that. Deviant Olem recommended it online, and I was like, okay, if Deviant says this is a good lock, I will get this lock.
Wait, the apartment complex chose this, or
No,
you
this is I'm renting a house now, and I asked my landlord, is like, hey, can I put this on? Like, you can still use the key to get in, but I want like the cleaning crew to be able to come in and stuff. So then I have like a
Yeah, yeah,
special
yeah.
code that I can put in, so I can program other codes, but
Mhm,
it's all offline, and
mhm.
but it's still you can give other people access if you will.
You are very trusting.
I mean,
Okay.
the alternative would be to give people my key.
No, I hear you. Which would be you
Yeah.
constantly changing out locks. So I hear you. Yes.
I did learn how to rekey locks though, so that was fun.
Nice.
When I moved here, I think there was 4 different keys that I was given for like each different door in the house had a different key. And again, I asked like, "Hey, can I make them all the same key? Like, don't worry about how I do it. Just like, is it okay if I do that?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." So now the front door key can open the side, the garage, and it was a fun learning experience. Again, I think Deviant was like, "Oh, you just get this um, oh, I forget the name of the company, but just get a kit."
We'll just write down the name of the company for later.
It's one of the common lock companies. I forget, but it was surprisingly
Deviant
easy to.
said to use this to rekey everything. I got this in the notes. Okay, great. Moving
Sorry,
on.
I got sidetracked.
Well, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's all on the same theme. Man, we blew. So, okay. So with your research as it is now, what are you hoping for? What are your goals?
So we're hoping to discover a little bit more than what they found in the original talk. I think there's a lot more to this system, and they admitted that in the talk. They said there's a lot of subsystems like NFC, the programmers themselves that they didn't really look at. And I think there's a pretty big avenue there because just like the system is similar across different lock SKUs, the programmer is also very similar. I actually ordered the wrong one at first when I first ordered it, and I realized that it's identical. They are also called like an M unit, except it's for the Oracode series of locks. So I think all of their lock systems, all of them from Dormakaba, are extremely similar. Where they use offline packs primarily, so like an offline physical access control system versus online. And that's what you were talking about earlier, where like our university and a lot of places, like the default is online. So like the card just has like a number. You tap it, and the door will ask the controller, "Hey, does this number have access to this door?" And then there's like a database somewhere in that upstream that correlates that number with a person, and then they're like, "Oh, this person is supposed to have access, allow or deny." Um, and so the problem with these offline pack systems is they are a little bit fundamentally a flawed idea, although you can implement them much better than the way it is now. And so our hope is to kind of see the full extent of the vulnerabilities because this system is pretty vulnerable. And there's been a lot of other issues with hotel hospitality systems in the past. So we also saw a talk from I don't know what conference this was at actually, but somebody in like 2016, 17 found almost through the same methods that we've been doing with SafeLock vulnerabilities on Assa Abloy's Ving card.
Mm-hmm.
And Ving card is in use in the vast majority of hotels. They're kind of like the de facto hotel lock that's out there, where SafeLock is a much smaller player in the market. Apparently, SafeLock's more affordable. I wouldn't know because I'm not like a
You don't
manager
have hotels?
Oh yeah, I don't manage hotels, but
What
that's what people have been saying.
what kind of monopolistic venture are you not in on already?
But yeah, it's so our hope is to figure out kind of the extent of the vulnerabilities, and if we find anything major that hasn't been disclosed, then we'll report that to Dormakaba. So if we find anything with the handheld programmer, that's something we would report. Right now, the majority of everything we've found has just been like minor corrections. So like in the original talk, they mentioned how the full field is 16 bytes of data, 1 byte for a checksum. But then on one of their slides, they go on to list 18 bytes worth of data. So that's just like a very simple, mistake. And so we like kind of figured out, oh, they kind of overestimated how many bits this was because they didn't really poke at the format that much. Once they figured out how to make it a master key, the work was pretty much finished. Like they didn't really care that much about the format, anything else. We also figured out one other additional thing, which is the card itself stores its own audit logs, which I thought was really funny.
Mm-hmm.
So when you tap your card on a door, the record of that access gets stored to the door's internal memory and the card's internal memory. So if you tap a card on a door and it doesn't open, the door will actually tell you the reason why your fob isn't opening the door in the own log. And so you're able to decode your own access logs. And so they have a function on the software called interrogating a user key. That's something we were also working on adding to the Proxmark. So this is something they didn't cover in the original talk. I'm not sure how much like a vulnerability that is. I just think it's kind of fun to be able to take your own fob from like a hotel and you can go through your own access records. But
yeah, that's neat. Because yeah, I guess they can tell, right? Like you go back to the lobby to front desk and it's like, hey, my key's not working. They can look at it and be like, oh, you tried the wrong room, sir, or oh no, the door didn't recognize your key or whatever. That seems like a really useful user experience kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we actually
Exactly.
used it at CypherCon when our lab wasn't working. We pulled the data off the card manually, parsed through the logs ourselves, and looked up the error code to figure out that our master key that we made expired at like 6 o'clock. So every day at the con at 6, it would stop working for the rest of the day. So
Yeah, we accidentally set a shift time on the emergency key, which isn't something that the software even lets you do, but because like the exercise was having participants craft their own emergency keys, they accidentally set a shift time on it, which I think is pretty funny. The idea that you have this key that overrides all security mechanisms that itself is like limited to only working between the hours of like 9 a.m. to 6 p.m.
So, okay, so here's a question. What if your system, like, I guess, how do you set time on your locks so it's aware of that? Maybe I'm
Um,
asking a stupid question.
It's the handheld programmer. So you program the handheld programmer from a computer running System 6000, or I guess the new like Ambience and whatnot. You plug it in, it gets synchronized. At least on System 6000, that's the only software I have access to. It will download and delete all the interrogation logs off of the programmer. You can optionally choose to encode an emergency key onto the programmer itself, and so the programmer can actually send that key to the lock. And From there, it updates the date and time, and then when you connect the handheld programmer to a lock, it sets the date and time. And if you don't set the date and time, in the logs, there's actually a bit that's flipped where the lock will say if the time isn't set or not. So it still logs access, it just would have the incorrect time.
Okay. Okay, that answers that because I'm like, how do you transport
Yeah.
time if nothing's talking really to much except on those
Yeah, you don't have a
transactions?
clock.
So we already talked about that. Okay, so let's talk about the tools that you're using to figure all this stuff out.
So we were mentioning Proxmark and RP or Flipper zeros, I guess.
Are you guys using flipper zeros? I got the
We just
impression you
talked about them,
weren't.
I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we've used the Flipper a little bit, but we haven't really made any apps for it. I like our end game would be to make like a theoretical application that would be able to pop open a door because I think it'd be really interesting. As well as making something like that for the Chameleon Ultra because that's very possible to do. It can emulate both MIFARE Classic and MIFARE Ultralight. So it would be very possible to set up like a very simple application on there that would be able to just, you tap it on the door and it pops open. And the Chameleon Ultra itself also is like a keychain size thing. So I think it'd be kind of cool as far as potential impact goes. Like someone can have this tiny little device on their keychain and it could pop open any door in the hotel. And
Is
so
that related to the Proxmark or is that its own separate thing?
that's actually its own separate device. So the
Oh.
Chameleon Ultra is more aimed towards emulation. So it's like a little device that goes on your keychain, has its own standalone battery, and you can connect to it over Bluetooth. Although I had some kind of iffy experiences with that, it's still very much a work in progress. But it works for like emulating key fobs, and it's still kind of in its early stages. Whereas the Proxmark is a lot more well established. And you can get Proxmarks that also have what's called like standalone mode, so you have better Bluetooth support, and you can connect to it remotely. But the one that we use and that most people use is just called the V3 Easy, and so that's like $40 online, whereas the standalone mode ones are a lot more, like $400. And so the majority of what we've been doing has all been accomplished from the Proxmark. Although, to be fair, we haven't really needed to poke at the RFID NFC aspect that much. A lot of what we've been doing has been the data format itself. And so once we can read the card, we could do that on a standard, just like the $5 to $10 NFC readers online. You don't need anything quite as overkill as the Proxmark to do that, because the key diversification function, like from the serial number to diversify the encryption key itself, that function has already been released online. So you don't have to actually crack the cards. If MIFARE Classic wasn't a broken standard, you could still read all the data off the cards. So you're able to do that yourself just from any NFC reader. So it's while we've been using the Proxmark as like our RFID reader of choice, a lot of what we've been doing has just been custom C programs and stuff to parse the fields and just give more of a human readable output.
Can I make a side comment? Because you just said
Yes.
C programs. Where did you guys learn C? Is it because of Linux?
My school teaches C.
Yes.
There's a
Oh,
class called
C.
is it hardware software programming, and it teaches assembly. I think it's MIPS and C.
Of course it did.
So the Proxmark client software is written in C, and it's actually a really nice code base, so it's really easy to add your own commands to that. So we're thinking of trying to get that, maybe our SafeLock tool merged into the main branch, but there's an issue with the encryption algorithm, just ripping it directly from the reversed code legally.
And just if you want to give a shout out to the university or school that you went to, just to remind people that C is still important, unfortunately.
Shout out Michigan Tech.
Thank you, Michigan Tech. Had a whole 3 days of discussing.
us firmware engineers are still deep in it, so.
Oh, trust me, I got stories now. I got additional stories. We'll talk Alvaro.
All right.
Yeah, it's just that one thing that I've noticed is that fewer schools are teaching C, it seems.
Interesting. What are they teaching instead?
I'm gonna even now, you have by default I think it's Java.
Python.
No, it's Python, then Java, and then if you work and then this is what I'm hearing, and then you take a specific class for C++, but very few are learning specifically about hardware software programming.
I mean, computer engineers might do more of that than computer science.
It's mixed. It's so mixed depending on your program.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since I was in school, but it was hardware software co-design for computer engineering. That's where we did a little FPGA, a little bit of C. But in electrical engineering, we learned C. But the computer science folks switched from Java to Python for 101.
Yeah.
And then did C++. And who knows, maybe they teach
You're very
Rust now.
lucky. You're very lucky. So we were taught C. This is a weird school, and it shouldn't have been this way because it was a million years ago. C++. And then you took the computer engineering class that was supposed to be hardware software, where you're writing VHDL and programmable logic and everything, schematic capture, and C suddenly. You didn't learn C, but you just go write some C, and of course assembly. But yeah, that's why my C was shit coming out of school. Anyway, okay, now that we've it's just a bee in my bonnet that I have about this. Okay, moving on. So we're hearing about all the research that you guys are doing. Are you going to release a paper on this, or do you feel like you're following a pretty strict process on how to go about announcing these changes? What exactly does that look like? Because I've never done that, and it seems kind of important that you do it the right way, the ethical way. I don't know, the responsible way.
Yeah. So that's something that we're definitely very interested in doing. This is kind of a first for us too. As far as releasing a lot of research, that would be, I've looked at doing that through my university, through both of our universities, but I'm not too sure if Josh wants to do a research project now that he's graduated. But we could get that, I think, potentially approved. But the big question is how do we report this to Dormakaba? So everything that we found so far has been mostly within the bounds of the original talk. I'm not sure if they would want us to disclose the same findings again, but the only difference that we found is they have unencrypted logs and unencrypted key data stored on the card. But those weren't covered in the original talk, but it's possible that they noticed that in the original disclosure. And both those are, I think, a little bit minor because that wouldn't get you into any places that you're not supposed to. It just lets someone who already has access or
Mhm.
has logs to decode their own logs. Um, but everything major that was like getting the emergency key, that so far has been within the bounds of that original talk. Now, if we figure something out about the HH6, we would then have to disclose that through them. I would think, unless it's like, again, like the same as the original talk. We don't know how the HH6 sends. If it gets the proper data from an interrogation, we suspect that it does, or how it sends that emergency key. The way that that interface works.
Mhm.
So if it is just basically, because I think the way that it, well, I know that the way that it emulates most of the functions is it's emulating cards. So when you're setting the time on the lock from the HH6, it's actually emulating a time set card. And when you're interrogating a lock, it emulates an interrogation card. So all it's doing is emulating a set of cards. And if it, when it unlocks a door, is just yet again emulating an emergency card, then that's essentially no different than the original disclosure. But if it isn't, if there's a different interface, if there's some other way where even on a patch system, it's still able to open a door, then that would be, I would think, big enough of a vulnerability to
Yeah.
warrant reporting.
I guess, and now it's sounding more intentional on their part that why they would have the logs unencrypted here. And maybe you guys have thought through this. Do you feel like possibly the hope is that, yes, you can't get into other places, but we can see where the other locations that you tried to use this card and passed or failed, or like, for example, in a criminal investigation, you might use that as a way to understand the path that particular I don't have a better word. I don't want to say criminal. What's the
The
word I'm looking for?
suspect.
The suspect. Thank you. Proceeded to go through, and then like find additional information, like
Mm-hmm.
video camera footage as a result of
But you
looking
could
at
do that
those
with
failed
encrypted
logs.
stuff
Yeah,
anyway, because you would just subpoena and like, hey, give me the encryption key. I'm the police, and then you still have the logs.
yeah, I guess, but why bug the innocent property owner with stuff like that
I think
when
it's
it's
more
just
like
right there?
the, hey, do we have time to implement encryption? Like, no, okay.
I'm believing that.
I suspect
We
that
got to
may
get
have
this
been what
out there.
happened. Yeah,
Well,
Yeah.
like the encryption that they use on the cards is like really kind of just thrown out there. Like they took a bunch of random stuff and they kind of just like half implemented deaths basically and called it a day. And it's been like
the,
that for like over 30 years.
the
So
product requirement said encryption. It didn't say what
I
kind or
I
how
just want
good.
to
yeah.
point out 30 years ago, I don't know about you, but I don't remember seeing product specs for a long ass time.
I mean, you said triple
It's just
DS.
like,
That's
yeah,
old school. It still
but yes,
works, but
yeah, it does. But like, I'm just thinking about like, as an engineer back then, like I would hear like, you'd be like, just implement this. And like, if the product manager didn't think things through, we were just like left to our own devices to come up with cryptography patterns. And frankly, that was foolish.
I mean, people still do it now.
Oh
At
yeah,
least we
yeah,
have NIST standard
yeah. But
algorithms and stuff.
but
But
why
I
would you
mean,
do that? But why would you do that for a commercial consumer product
ask
that's not going
Telegram.
into military? Hmm?
Ask Telegram. They have their own thing.
Mm.
Like people still do it because I can do it better.
I did not have on my bingo card that we'd mention the word telegram.
Well, they have their own crypto. They don't use
Yeah.
any standard stuff.
Hmm. Well, here we
Speaking
are.
slightly unrelated, but of
Yeah, go ahead.
standards, the patent for the original safe lock, no one has talked about it, but Noah was reading one of the manuals, and at the bottom he looked up the patent, and it
Ooh.
actually describes the bit formats and a lot of the
Ooh.
stuff that the original researchers
Oh shit.
found out themselves, but it's just listed in the patent from like 30 years
Nice.
ago. There's so
Yeah,
Yeah,
much
that's
useful
well,
a good
information in there.
point.
Um, so
so in your arsenal of techniques that you'd like to share with people, where exactly do read the patents
That's OSINT,
range?
right?
Hmm. And it's, yeah, I'm very glad Josh brought that up. I wanted to
Oh,
mention
good.
this. So I found that just kind of on a whim. I was like, oh, well, there's these patents. I was looking at a lot of random information about
Hmm.
the hotel. I forget even why I looked it up. Maybe I was like curious what the old locks looked like. But as I was looking through the patent, I realized they describe all the different fields that are on the card. They don't say how many bits it is, but they'll say that it's like, this is a hotel locking system that contains a format for the key card level, the key card expiration. Like they just define all the different levels of the card. And not only that, they have logic, like UML diagrams for how the lock's internal logic works. So they even define like checks card, like if expiration date, then deny. If outside of shift time, then deny. Like it checks every single different field and it tells you everything how it works. So I thought that was really funny because it's not like anything major yet, but it's like a good amount of information. And I don't think anyone has found this yet. At least no one's talked about it. And in the original talk, there's no way that the original disclosure, like I don't think they looked at that at all, because it actually defined some of the fields that they weren't quite so sure about.
On. Yeah.
And so, there's a little bit of that. And also, when I was watching that talk on VingCard, I thought it was really funny how they, right after I had found the patent, they mentioned in their talk, and from a lot of technology in like the kind of 90s and earlier era, if you check the patent, that's a good source of information. So this isn't like fully unknown. It's just something that like I kind of just thought about on a whim, but I think it's a pretty good idea, especially if you're looking at older embedded devices.
Yeah. Sorry. I guess this kind of goes back to, so sometimes you meet companies and they want everything. We're going to try to patent everything, which means they're publicly disclosing things. On the other hand, there are ones that like for every single thing they consider that IP and they're never going to disclose it.
I mean, that's what space companies do because they know that the people who would steal that don't give a shit about patents. And so
I'm going to go with China.
Yeah, they'd rather have like trade secrets than patent it. Because patent is only useful if you can actually litigate and protect it.
Yeah. Otherwise,
but it's great for. I mean, the patents and then FCC filings are another great source of information. If you want to see teardowns of hardware that you don't have, just look at the FCC filing, and it's probably on there.
I hope that continues to be the case.
I think they can request to hide the information for, I don't know if it was like 6 months or some amount of time after release, but eventually it gets published. So
I guess this is putting everybody here on the spot, including Alvaro. I want to hear his opinion too. Which would you do if you were making a lock, an electronic lock? Would you go for patent or would you go for trade secret? Asking
open
for
source. Ha!
Right.
I'm never asking you a question again because that's always your answer.
I know it's serious though. Like
at least it would be audited.
If it's properly designed, it doesn't matter if you have the source code, right? That's my answer.
Okay. Additional takes, opinions?
Yeah, I think
security.
If you want to go, Josh.
I think security through obscurity is just never a good idea. So,
but that was the 90s. I could tell you about all the DSL modems I made.
Yeah, I really agree. I think open sourcing it is kind of nice in that you're forced to make a product that itself is secure when an adversary knows how it works. Whereas with SafeLock, they kind of just hope, okay, well, hopefully no one pokes at this too much, and it holds up until someone does. But if you make something that's open, it's possible to make a system that would be fully open and understood, but still be secure. But the way you would do that is you can't have a generic encryption for your whole product line. So you would have to, by default, like the only way to do this, since you're releasing it into the public, would be you have to go in with the knowledge that, okay, everyone like per site keys. So like every customer is going to have their own encryption key and it's going to have to be managed in the software. And you're going to have to set it up kind of with a secure foundation versus like, oh, let's try to make it a little bit convenient. Let's just hope these keys don't get leaked. And then eventually, of course, they do. Whether you're HID or Dormakaba, eventually these keys do get leaked.
Okay. I guess, okay, let me play jerky corporate overlord counterpoint or
how do we make money?
Yeah, exactly. So two things. One, if you're constantly getting feedback and you can't actually release a product, that's a problem. How do you design something that's going to be flexible enough that you can redeploy and it not being a shit ton expensive? And if it's a physical product, so it has hardware in it, like you almost like inherently like are going to be screwed if you're going to be held up with dealing with bugs and the ongoing maintenance and transparency
how's that
costs.
different from SafeLock though? Like they're already having to do that.
I guess that's true.
So I would say
But
it's not a
now,
downside.
but they okay. They didn't start that way. They didn't start being transparent and what This
They
is
still
this is like
haven't.
their own. This is their own bed that they made. We're talking like from like if you try to go with a different strategy where you're fully transparent the entire time, like what are going to be? How does that end up impacting your hardware, physical product company, and the profit stream that you're supposed to be getting?
I mean, with open source, you can always you have service plans, you have like guarantees, like, oh, you buy from us, we guarantee that this will work, right? Like you can buy it from a third party reseller that's cloned our product, but if something goes wrong, don't call us. That's how companies that do open source stuff work, right? Is you have your retainers to support, to add features, to do this, to do that, which is the same that these other companies already do. They just lock you in and you have no choice.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I don't see any like clear winners in between.
I just don't think enough open source or companies have tried the open source way for hardware stuff, and especially for security products. I can't think of any, just because the industry is so into the obscurity.
You know what? We just like had a whole discussion by ourselves without our guests. I suspect you guys might have something to say. I don't know.
I think you guys would probably know more than I do, at least on that topic.
Because I was looking at the next question. I'm like, you guys are kind of like in student mode still. So,
but you have fresh perspectives, and
you do have fresh perspectives.
You're not poisoned by years of
oh my god,
all these horrible things.
This is what you're going to be like in the future, guys.
Jaded.
No,
I think you probably already are, just by having to do this kind of work.
Yeah. So, kind of keeping it upbeat and light and fresh, and leveraging, what your current experiences are. How have your studies helped you with this project, or was it purely like nerding out at the Linux users group in Red Team?
I think we've mentioned this kind of a lot, but I'm hoping to bring more of this to the school, really, because right now it's been something we've been doing on the side.
Yeah.
And I would like to have more of this in classes, but I think it's pretty difficult for professors to kind of understand what exactly something like this would entail. So a lot of our classes get into really high level like game theory, or it's more general stuff like networking security and like system security. But something that's more niche, like anything hardware security, RFID, physical security, all that is definitely very much a niche. And it's not really covered in many academic institutions. So that was my hope for the Red Team. That's why it was a position I ran on for this upcoming year. And I hope to bring more of these kind of exercises there. So everything that like our classes kind of don't cover, so whether that's like something kind of smaller, like reverse engineering software, to hardware security, to IoT hacking, all kind of the whole field, I'm really hoping to bring this more to my university so that more students can kind of experience this.
Josh, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, so our school we had something called, so there's Cybertruck, Cyber Auto, and Cyber Boat.
Wait, what the heck is a cyber boat?
Not to be confused with Tesla.
Yeah, that's what I was like. I'm like, I don't think he did that. Go ahead.
Cybertruck and Cyber Auto are like hands-on learning about hacking vehicles, and they happen in Detroit because it's like Motor City. But they also did a spin-off one year called Cyber Boat at our university, where they had like Grim and the car hacking village from DEF CON, and some other Cyber Cinex who also goes to DEF CON, and they host some like big boat hacking thing. And they all came up to our school and they kind of taught us the basics of reversing and let us get hands-on and hooking up with the CAN bus on like boats and stuff. So that really got me interested in a lot of stuff. So they stopped doing that, but it'd be cool if our school could do more stuff like that. I mean, that was cool
before
experience.
my time. I want to add, unfortunately.
Oh man, you're probably so jelly about it. I get it, so it kind of sounds like let me see if this is like what the dream is. The dream is there's a semester long work, let's say seminar, where engineering students are given, and Alvaro, maybe you're gonna feel similarly because we've had this discussion a couple times, is preparing engineers for, hey, you're working on this product, but sometimes you have to think about the security risks. You have to you have to get ahead of what you're being asked for by product managers, your boss, and whoever around what the implications are. So how do you make a product ethically? And here's some of the techniques you can use to debug, understand the security risks, um, and just kind of make a better product overall. And and just have a whole seminar on learning those techniques and just bringing in different guest lecturers to help you go through these labs.
I think that would be really cool. Like I know during my degree, there were like
Mm.
2 mentions of cybersecurity in the entire of my degree. Like they mentioned buffer overflows like once, and then like they mentioned SQL injections like once, and like that's all you learn about security in a CS degree. So, people come out with a CS degree and they know how to write code, but they don't know anything about writing
That's
secure code.
nuts. In this
So,
day.
I would say like that's maybe better than what I got, which was like an ethical discussion before we went back to assembly code.
Don't hack, y'all.
No, we were totally, oh my God, like so many people in my cohort, like one person, I guess, thought they were really slick and sent threatening messages to the president using the computer. Oh, of course he was logged in elsewhere.
Yeah. It's
It
interesting
was
you
a long
say
time
that
ago.
because I've noticed that too. A lot of embedded devices have really poor security, and I think it's a mixture of factors.
Yep.
People have
Mhm.
mentioned that in industry, like you're really time constrained, it's not
Yep.
really a priority, and especially I don't think they cover it. I mean, that has to be the reason when you're looking at like SafeLock. We've looked at like embedded vending protocols too, because one of the clubs on campus has a vending machine. So they
Oh.
recently were looking at a project to add like payment processing to that. And when you're dealing like MDB and all these like pretty old protocols, especially CAN, a
Mhm.
lot of them were just designed insecure. They're around for legacy systems, never really
Yeah.
been
Yes.
updated.
Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah, and security costs money, right? So when you're fighting for resources and they're like, we need to ship this on in February because we said so, and you're like, well, it's not going to be ready. They're like, make it ready. So you start cutting features, right?
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that's very common for embedded systems, this happened with routers and many other things, is that you
Mhm.
get a chipset from a vendor and they have example code. And the example code always skips security because they just
Mhm.
want it to work quickly. And then people copy paste the example code and don't actually do the security bit
Can I
because it works.
let me add, I will add multiple spots here. So I've worked as an FAE, and yes, that's absolutely 100% true. We're just giving you like, hey, here are the features that you requested. Here's a demonstration of them. Now then, if you didn't put on there security, it ain't going to happen. So you're absolutely right. Exactly what's happening right there.
There's a
other
big comment that says insert security code here.
Oh, you wish, because the other thing is that if, the chip vendor has done this for you, the chip vendor is not the most savvy arbiters of software in general. And they
They
are
make
also,
silicon.
and yeah, so that's the other thing is that I've been a big proponent of if we as product makers do not demand these features, you will not get these features. And I know that that means it's going to be a long time before that stuff's sitting in there. And there has been some improvement and some awareness over the last decade plus that I've been asking for this in wearables, but you guys are absolutely right. Like the time constraints, it's getting cut. And then I'm going to add to this. The other thing that falls on us is we're moving so fast that we're doing shitty code reviews.
If at all.
Yes, we need to talk. Yeah. There's all these things that are supposed to save you from yourself. That as you have less resources, both in terms of programmers, time, money, we're throwing those out. So, welcome to the industry.
Again, with a cheerful podcast.
Yeah, the cheerful podcast.
Let's talk about tools. I like tools.
Okay, we're gonna go. Last question. We ask everybody this. I hope you thought about this. What is your favorite tool?
Josh, you want to answer this one?
You
I know
guys
you
can
have
pass it back and forth
thoughts.
for a while
I,
if you want.
I mean, I'd say the Proxmark is probably my favorite tool. It's just super useful for a lot of the
We got to
stuff we
get a
do.
link in
And
the show notes here.
Iceman's pretty cool. Iceman makes the Iceman fork, which is if you're using a Proxmark, you should be using the Iceman fork. It's the much
So different
updated.
firmware for it.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I mostly agree with Josh. The Proxmark's been very useful with our stuff. Just as a general tool, I use like Nmap on a daily basis. It's super nice, just for like debugging network configs and stuff. So that's probably like my overall favorite. But as far as like this actual niche goes, it would have to be the Proxmark.
Cool. Wait, didn't we used to ask like about like on a desert island, what would you take with you?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking you.
Oh yeah, you'd ask all sorts of random questions.
Oh yeah. Not just me. You would ask these too. Throw me under the bus. Okay. One last thought-provoking question. Okay. You're on a desert island, not with each other. What do you take with you? What's the one thing you take with you?
The Proxmark.
this coconut won't open. It's Proxmark. That sounds like the winning solution there.
It's a good question, like in general or technology-wise?
It doesn't have to be technology. It could be just as easy as like I need a Leatherman utility, multi-cool
I
or
would
something
definitely
like that.
bring my Leatherman. Probably a copy of the Hardware Hacking Handbook, just so I have reading material.
Yes, yeah.
Entertainment, yeah, that's underestimated how.
I'd bring like an old ThinkPad, probably.
That battery's only going to last like what, 3 minutes?
The power supply, of course, and a solar panel or generator.
That's two things.
No, it's one package.
Oh,
it's a remote island cyber panel.
Cyber rig.
Yeah, cyber rig.
And then like we'll just throw in there because when someone gave up that ThinkPad with the solar panel.
It had an Iridium satellite terminal.
They also included like no, they didn't include radio. They also included like those like cool cyber shades.
Just you need those on an
cyber in Cyberpunk 2077. I'll show you. I'll send you a picture. If you don't have them, I'm going to send them to you, Alvaro. Why don't I just send them to everybody? They're hilarious. You look cool while you're hacking, but also blinded. So now is the time that we're going to shut down the show. Josh, Noah, if you want to be reached, how do you want people to reach you? Wait, why did that sound so weird?
Because that's...
Or just reach out. If you want to be found, how do you want to be found? Where do you want to be found? With a ThinkPad on a desert island.
Where can people find you online? Is a little less sketch.
I guess you can email me at noahholl@mt.edu if you have any questions about anything we talked about.
Cool.
You can reach me at stiebeljoshua@gmail.com. Last name, first name, Gmail.
Have y'all collaborated with any external folks on the project, or it's been mostly you two?
Yeah, we have actually. We worked with Aaron and I believe, was it Nate from Praetorian? Will from Praetorian, yes. And so they were a great help. We met them at CypherCon, and they also noticed our little display we had going, and so they know a lot more about hardware than we do. So they've been helping us a lot with debugging the little handheld programmer. That's another thing we've been working on with them.
Talk about an icebreaker. Just bring something that only like 2 people in the audience will recognize, but that they're the ones you want to talk to.
Yeah. It's like kind of like a very customized nerd snipe,
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, Alvaro, if you want to be found, where should I find you?
alvarop.com. Yep.
You can find me at RebelBotGen online. Probably. I don't remember anything anymore.
We haven't done this in a few months.
I like that we're still laughing. Okay. If you have comments, you can find us not on Twitter anymore or X or whatever the heck it's called. But you can find us on Mastodon at unnamed_show. Don't bother touching on that comment form because we're not going to look at it. But you can always find us at our website if for some reason you're not finding us on your podcast app, unnamedre.com, where the show notes are very primo. Shout out to our Discord since we shut down our Patreon, our Discord still lives on. So if you want to find previous guests, oftentimes you will find them there, as well as a bunch of other
Yeah,
really
we'll send
cool
y'all an
people.
invite.
Yeah. And we'll probably, I think if you want to be on the Discord, hit us up personally.
Yeah,
We could
people have
probably make it
emailed
happen.
me, and
Yeah.
that's better than open.
Yeah.
Anyway.
As always, we ask for reviews on podcast apps. So iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, say something nice. We'll read it. Possibly on the show. I don't know. And thank you again so much, Josh and Noah. Until next time. Bye, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
All right, thank you so much.